We'll talk about this today if you want to, but I've been spending a lot of time learning about and really curious about models of romantic love, right? And how it's been packaged and sold to us and how it's been pushed onto us and what the impact that's had on relationships, the impact that's had on how we pick relationships, create them, what we expect of them. Yeah. And it's very interesting if you watch a movie like Pretty Woman and you're like that was a real hit. And now, I mean, imagine if a movie like that came out now, people would be like, what is this?
And it's still on TV all the time, which is crazy. Well, I mean, just to that conversation, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I know you have this Disney-fied experience of society and specifically love. How did that play an impact on your childhood growing up?
Yeah, I think this is a very common experience. My experience, I say, the personal is very universal in say Western civilizations, which is that I think we were sold this idea of a transcendent romantic love. So once upon a time, you think, okay, marriages, love were very practical. It was very you were getting together, you were having a family, it was often arranged. But then we came into this era of romantic love, where we got to pick our partners, which is very exciting. And, obviously I'm a huge fan of love. But part of that was this experience where I think we really saw love as this completing idea. I'm going to find someone who completes me, who makes life worth it. It's the Disney story of, some handsome stranger you don't really know, or beautiful princess you've never spoken to. You somehow get together, and then it ends with marriage and happily ever after. So the expectations of what it created with love was that love is going to solve all my problems. And then love is magic. Yeah. Love is magic. It will just happen to me. That love is just requires the exact right person. And you think about how this plays out in a culture, and certainly in my life, is that rather than taking responsibility for love and going, wow, listen, there are really practical, predictable, healthy ways to choose a great partner and really healthy skills I can learn to create love and choose love. And so when tough times come, rather than being like, oh, this wasn't in the movie, I guess this is the wrong person, and bailing, you know, okay, cool, this is a human love, and we're going to work together, we're going to communicate, we're going to figure it out, we're going to build a longer term relationship. And so we think, between the divorce rates, which, I think is just indicative of, I don't think relationships were necessarily better before, just people didn't have the same freedoms to leave. Mm-hmm. But people are really now asking the question of how can I have a healthy, lasting, delicious love versus I think what we've had, which is normal love, which hasn't necessarily been healthy love.
Yeah.
So for me, I really did that. I don't know if you've had the same experience, but some part of me was always fantasizing about this perfect person who's going to come to me. And one of the things I see a lot with, singles, whether it's in our platform or Vette or, friends, is that there is still this kind of mythical notion that one day your love life will just be completed because someone magical is going to arrive.
Right. Save you in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It disempowers us because we think we don't have a role to play in choosing and creating good love, we don't.
Right. Did that ever growing up, did that idea of this perfect man that in a way is going to save you, did that affect how you approached your career journey and what you wanted to do with your personal life?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was always pretty career driven. I started as a lawyer, and then pivoted to being, a high school teacher, and then went into sort of online publishing, and was always exploring and putting all my energy into career because I thought love would just happen.
Okay.
Well, and I've seen this as well. I think a lot of people are having this experience where they focus on their careers and then they wake up in their 30s and they go, when did my prince not come? Or when did my prince?
I get that.
We thought love would just happen, but it didn't. And so I can see this now, a lot of the people that we work with are people who have come to that realization of they want great love and they want great relationships, but they were living in the model of it would just happen, and it just hasn't.
Okay. Yeah. So what kind of law did you practice, by the way?
I was a litigator. So I did a little criminal law, and I did some civil litigation as well.
So you're a litigator in New Zealand. You're kind of hometown, originally from Cape Town, but spent most of your childhood in New Zealand. How did you you get out of the lawyer litigator mindset and go into being a teacher? That seems like a very, unless you're being a law professor, it seems like a very different shift.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs will relate to this. I'm sure, your audience is very much in that world. Most people who become entrepreneurs have really interesting, diverse backdrops because I feel like it's building different tool sets, right?
For sure.
To this day, my capacity to read every legal document and be a double check on everything
That's
that gets
huge.
right? It's so great.
That's like the best combo.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, I don't think anyone had entrepreneur on their job sheet when they were a kid. It wasn't really an option. I think people end up building companies, not because it was an easy thing to do, but often because they tried traditional professions and didn't find it a fit. 100%. And for me, I was a great lawyer, but it was exactly that where I was like, this is a very, very limited field. And so while I love the mastery of different skills, I think, one thing I've noticed that if you want to make an impact in the world, one of the best ways to do it is to build something that you're deeply passionate about, to create a new alternative model when something doesn't work. Like for me, that's love. I look at the state of love. I look at between the Disneyfication and then how that plays out on dating apps. For me, building an alternative system is really, really important to me. And I think most entrepreneurs kind of come from that. And they use whatever professional skill sets we kind of hustled along the way. I remember I have a friend who was a chef. And, but he said to me, he's like, being a chef taught him so much for business because his ability to multitask and to run complicated operations was, really trained as a chef. So I think we learn how to cross apply. I'm curious if you have had the same experience, if you have things from your past.
It's funny because you have
The whole nothing makes sense to the outsider perspective on a journey, and especially like on an entrepreneurial journey. But I think if you sit down and you look at the skill set and you really, bridge the pieces together, you do see a pattern. Of course, a lawyer can always find a skill. I think I personally I always say I feel like I could have been a great lawyer, but I also think I would have hated it. But it's such a great skill set, and it's such a great skill set to sit down and be like, okay, let me look at things not only objectively, but in between the small fine details as well to come up with the best solution. So how long did you practice law then?
I practiced law for about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And it's interesting because I think a common theme I notice with my friends who build companies as well is that there is exactly like this. A lot of people have this really diverse backdrop and can have almost insecurity about it because I think we live in a society that has for a long time really valued mastery, taking one thing, sticking with one thing, becoming a master of that. Whereas I think often entrepreneurs have all kinds of diverse experiences, right? And I always say that the cool thing about that is you learn how to spread the butter, right? Whatever lesson you learned in whichever training you had, or with its personal experiences or internships or academics, whatever it is, finding ways to connect the dots across that, spread the butter into whatever you're building. And so with law, same thing, even though, yes, there's the technical skills, I'd say even more than the technical skills, it has been the critical thinking and persuasion. Listen, if you raise money, it's a really interesting thing, but raising money to me is a combination of almost sales and almost like a legal presentation.
Right.
And so I think in those circumstances, what it takes to confidently sit in front of, whether it's investors, whether it's, looking for new partners, people draw, for me, I've drawn on all my past experiences, especially a high school teacher, because teenagers are terrifying. I always say to myself, whenever I'm scared of doing something, I'm like, there's nothing an adult will say to me that is scarier than what a teenager has said to me.
What did you teach in high school? That's, so true. What subject did you teach?
I taught English and history.
Okay, got it. Yeah, it's such an interesting shift. Obviously, as a society, we're always shifting and growing and changing. But, from the older generations who got a job out of college, spent their 30 plus years at that same company, rode the ladder of promotions, if you will, bonuses here and there, and then had retired and had of Social Security and pension and whatever you want to say in that. And now, like, as we're coming up as a generation, you know, we're constantly reminded, oh, by the way, there's probably not going to be Social Security when you retire. We barely have 401ks now. Like, it's hard to buy a home, and this generation, everything that comes into that, I think, is also bleeding into people creating their own reality of entrepreneurial journeys as well.
Well, I know you speak to obviously a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm curious, what do you think gave rise to entrepreneurship? Because I think once upon a time, it wasn't so glamorous. Like, there was a time where being like a big finance person was like the cool job to have. Now that's very uncool. It's way cool to be an entrepreneur. What do you think? What was the shift there?
You know, we were talking earlier about like the shift in media and the shift of perception of women and just normal individuals in commercials. And I think some of that plays into it of there was an ideal of this was your ideal marriage, like you find your husband and this is perfect and everything's great. You know, same thing with a job. You stay at that job and this is what you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to have the 2.5 kids and X, Y, and Z. And I think as society has shifted their mindset on what is the ideal form of beauty, they've really shifted that same ideal of like, okay, well, there's not a cookie cutter lifestyle for every single person. I know personally myself, like I definitely don't enjoy working for other people. That sounds really bad, but like I enjoy creating my own path. I enjoy like collaborative environments where I don't feel like my boss has to tell me this. And that's, I think, what really brought me onto an entrepreneurial journey. What forged your path?
Entrepreneurship. So, you know, like as I hear you speak, I think this is definitely something, you're right, a certain generation has grown up hearing, like it's now to be the entrepreneur, it's to be the, you know, like the big company that blows up, or the Elon Musk, the whatever, right? And I think we see these figures who've done really well, and they would glamorize them as, I think, like everyone can be an entrepreneur. But, you know, we were talking about this before. I'm curious, like, how would you balance that with the really intense challenges that come with being an entrepreneur? Because, like, listen, yeah, no one necessarily wants to be bossed around by their boss, but there's real pros to being part of like a secure, salaried.
100%. 100. I mean, it's a safety net. And I was just talking about this with someone where, you know, if you've been in a corporate environment your whole life, you're used to going on work trips that everything's expensed. You go to dinners and happy hours with your company and you never see a bill. It's always just credit card, someone else's card. So to take that safety net out, if you've never experienced that, or to understand what that feeling is like for an entrepreneur, I think it's a really hard concept for people to get into their mindset. And again, like as we were talking about at the beginning of this, was really the goal of this podcast, was to highlight some of the tougher times in an entrepreneurial path, because it's not talked about enough. It's not, when you're on the journey yourself, you feel very alone at times, and you feel like, well, that person had all of these connections and all of this money, and that's how they did it. So, but I don't have those things, so I can't do those things. It's definitely like you have to have a positive mindset the entire time, which in general is a hard thing. But when you don't have a safety net, I think it's sometimes impossible.
It's interesting. I was hosting an event in New York called Founders Made, which is a bunch of founders, investors get together for a few days, and incredible panels and an amazing chance. Like, those kinds of experiences are amazing for entrepreneurs because the solidarity, right? Hearing the stories of other people, hearing the struggles. And there was one of the panels was, they were asking the investors, what is the single most important quality you look for in a founder? And it was like resilience, thick skin, tenacity. Like, there is something truly about, you know, this idea that when you're making something new, you kind of, there's a real, I call it like healthy delusion. You have to have like almost like a healthy level of delusion to hold the vision of something new that you're creating that does not yet exist, holding the vision that, you know, it is something that can work, that people will understand it, that people will take it up, and holding that often in, you know, contradiction and contrast to what other people's perspectives are. And that is, I think there is a temperament to people who are entrepreneurs. There's a risk-taking level. And, you know, I always say to my friends, like, I don't think everyone should be an entrepreneur. I think that the cool thing about this world is that depending on how you're wired, some people will be wired to do that. And then, like, for instance, my team, I'm so grateful for my team, because the people who make up my team are so skilled in how they are and what they contribute, that it works so beautifully. And I think if everyone, the fantasy of being an entrepreneur I have friends who feel, well, I see the conversations around like insecurity that they haven't gone and built their own company versus no, but did you play an amazing role in creating something with a team?
Absolutely.
And to the point of the vulnerabilities, it's like, I don't think people talk enough about just the crippling self-doubt that comes along with.
It's funny because those adjectives you use too, of in a speaker sense of the ideal entrepreneur, a lot of those adjectives are typically used in like a masculine sense as well, which can feel very foreign and potentially debilitating as a woman entrepreneur.
Because like the way that my co-founder and I have been building our company, we made a very deliberate decision to not take up the martyred identity of a founder or CEO. For me, it's been very important. The DNA of our company is healthy relating and transparency and accountability and pleasure and play. And I always say to my team, like, we can't build something that has those values if we're not building it with those values as we go. And so, one of the things we always say is how we build this matters as much as what we build. And checking in with that, because I see this over and over where you have this kind of idea of the values you're putting into your company, but you're not actually building with those values, right? Because you're focused on getting it done on time and And I refuse to kind of sort of subscribe to this idea that in order to build a successful company, I also have to kill myself slowly. Right. I sort of feel like there's a way to do this. I think working with feminine principles of can we build this with incredible collaboration, in a healthy way, a healthy expenditure of energy, time, and respect. I don't expect my employees to kill themselves in the name of the company. I expect them to participate and contribute, and again, to be in healthy relating. So what we build encourages healthy relating.
How do you maintain that ideal though, as you grow as a company? I've seen multiple companies have a strong foundation of great values, but then as they expand and grow well beyond the founders and well beyond like the initial team, and you get different managers in and whatnot, it can definitely turn into a toxic environment. I've seen it multiple times. We've seen it countless times. Like, I don't want to bring up very like specific companies, but they're in the news about, this founder was great, and then 3 years in, they became a complete psycho. How do you plan on maintaining that?
It's something I think about a lot. I have ideas. I wouldn't say I have answers. I'd say because we're still, we're a relatively small team of about 8-9 people. And we're remote. I think there's also interesting challenges with doing that remotely, pros and cons, but it's something I think about a lot. I like a lot of what we talk about is intentionality. And I think we try to codify as much as possible what we're working on and what matters to us, whether it's the language used in our entire company or whether it's like the principles of how we approach things. I'm very lucky that I have my co-founder as a coach who, a large part of her life, she spent going into companies and helping them clean up their stuff. And so she has a lot of experience there, which I can lean on and bring in, but it's a very interesting creative problem. I'm curious if you've actually seen any clear principles at work.
I personally, I've seen the back end side of bad work environments, and I've seen the front end side of like beginning new stages of companies, but that whatever that shift is in the middle that happens to go on the bad side, I haven't seen it yet. So
this is true of everything. So, because of course I spend most of my time obsessing and researching romantic relationships. Yeah. But I do find a patterning, which is like the same thing happens in a romantic relationship. Starts great, you have this amazing honeymoon period, everything's amazing. And then suddenly you can fast forward 2-3 years and it's not good. And you go, what happened? Like, at what point did it go wrong? And I really think this applies in general to anything you do. If you don't approach it with very clear intentionality, if you don't proactively go, okay, what is it about a relationship that makes it work? And how do we build that in? How do we plan for it? There are predictable things that can create a relationship to deteriorate, a lack of intimacy, not dealing with problems, incorrect communication, not asking for your needs, whatever it is. And then it can just seem like a slow deterioration over time where there's no intentionality. I'm feeling like the same is similar with companies where, you can get, I know I've seen this for myself for sure. I can get so wrapped up in executing and delivering on the product and making sure that we're nailing the business and the product side of things. It can be easy to then forget that a huge part of the company is making sure that the internal sort of ecosystem is feeling really good too. And so I think maybe it's about applying intentionality. So we can learn from everyone else's mistakes and successes. What builds a good team culture?
Yeah.
I think it comes down to like regular communication, regular check-ins. I'm always curious with my employees, like what would they like to grow in? What do they want to learn in? Making sure that people feel acknowledged and rewarded and included. The things that I would want for myself. So I think it's almost like that. It's like, and there's no perfect thing, but I just think applying a little bit of intentionality means we don't wake up in 2 years in a relationship or a company and go, what happened?
It is interesting because, I think we've all been there in a breakup, in like a relationship where you're already on the it's too far gone part of your relationship. And then you try to pinpoint like a specific moment, like it was one thing. Of course, there's situations if there was infidelity or anything like that, but you always try to pinpoint like one or two moments of like, that was the shift and that was what broke us in a way. And I think that's so interesting that relating that to a company, especially from like a social dating perspective.
Amazing things about this entrepreneurial journey for me has been that there's a direct relationship between the work I'm doing on myself and my personal accountability and the company.
Yeah.
And I think so many of us divorce those two things. We think, okay, I am in CEO founder mode and then there's like me as a human. Yeah. But I notice I have amazing coaches and therapists. Like I really lean on all the tools that I have at my community because I find like any kind of fears I have or any unconscious beliefs I have about, whether it's money or people or success, that ends up so intensely kind of like infecting the company. Yeah. And same with a relationship, right? Where you can, if you're not accountable and cleaning up your own fears, beliefs, paranoias about love, then it can seep into the relationship. So I think there's something very interesting about that. And a lot of the very successful entrepreneurs I've met have such an awareness of themselves and how they impact what's happening and are so accountable for cleaning themselves up.
Yeah. So how did the concept of founding a different online dating experience come to be?
Listen, anyone who's single, and like this, I promise you, anyone who is a listener of your podcast who is single is also suffering because it's one of those, it's an incredible industry to be in because it's a huge industry. People are incredibly motivated to find love. Human relationships are so important to us. We're so motivated to go find someone, date someone, love somebody. And if you ask anyone who's single, nobody's like, oh, I love the dating apps. Brilliant. 100%. So great. Yeah. Everyone, the actual cliche about dating is it sucks.
It's the worst.
I'm only on the apps because I have to. And so we're in this interesting moment now where I think it doesn't make sense to go sit in a bar. You can like, okay, but then you go on the apps, it's also exhausting. And for me, like during COVID, which I also call relationship survivor, and I was married for 4 years. My husband and I did not make it on the end. And during COVID, we decided to consciously uncouple. We did it beautifully. But then I found myself single in the middle of COVID.
Right.
And, I was like quite excited at first. I was like, oh, cool. Let me check out the apps. I'm going to, what a cool new world of being single to explore. But within about 3 to 4 weeks, and I did everything, Hinge, Bumble, Tinder, The League, Raya. Like I tried all the different systems, both the kind of exclusive systems, the open systems. And really within a month or two, I really had this experience of like, what did they do to love? These kinds of systems are like the Instagram of love. They're driven for dopamine hits, not for deep human connection. And as well as being disappointing on that front of, feeling overwhelmed, not feeling like you're meeting with someone you like, they've also erred into being dangerous. You have a system which has kind of like a base of anonymity, which breeds antisocial behaviors. And, ask anyone who's single, at the disappointing end is like ghosting, catfishing, the lying, people don't treat each other very well. But at the end, last year,
questions.
$560 million in the US last year was lost to dating scams. I spoke to a guy recently. He lost $30,000. He met a woman and it was a whole scam. And so, and then you talk about the physical abuse, the verbal abuse. So there's disappointing all the way to dangerous. And so this is an area where to build a relationship requires vulnerability and safety. And so, this area where we're trying to connect and be open-hearted is also one of the most dangerous areas of our lives. And so these systems, to me, when I jumped on, I was like, this doesn't work. Yeah. And because the tech is set up in a certain way, pretty much every dating site, every dating app has the same functionality underneath it. They skin for different things. They target different groups. They kind of pull you into different sort of, I'd say, matched communities. But the functionality is ultimately the same, and it doesn't set people up for success. And so my co-founder and I were like, could we try use the tech that came out of COVID and combine that with like really effective romantic psychology to create a platform which is geared towards creating healthy love?
Yeah. How did your experience go from going through a conscious uncoupling divorce to wanting to be ready or being ready to date again? How was that experience for you, especially in the COVID time? And how long was it?
Yeah, I think so. I got separated in, I think it was like September 2020.
Okay.
And, was in New York. And it's interesting because I think there is an art to doing a breakup well. And obviously conscious uncoupling is an amazing model to follow. Yeah, it's really helpful, especially like for me, I wanted to be able to be in beautiful relationship with my ex-husband, who I am now. Now we're very, very close. But it's really a grieving cycle because it feels like a death. And I think most people who go through a breakup, we don't have a lot of great language around it. And because nobody actually died, I noticed that people aren't necessarily very sympathetic about it. But the people rate divorce as one of them, as like almost the most painful experience of their life. Mm-hmm. And that type of loss, not just of the person that you were married to, but of the future you dreamed of, I think these are extremely painful things. And if you don't deal with them well, they can then inform so much of your future love journey, right? Yeah. So for me, I spent a lot of time, I went alone. I went into like a healing period and I grieved.
Did you guys cut off communication like completely?
Yes. So the conscious uncoupling that we did was very intentional. We sat together, we wrote gratitude letters to each other, and we sat down and expressed all the love and gratitude we have for each other. We sat down and wrote an email to all our friends and family. We took each other off social media. We took each other off everything and gave ourselves a period of like a 6-7 month no communication break, and then said we would check in then. And then at that point when we checked in, we decided to take a little bit longer, and just holding it so compassionately with this vision that, each of us needed space to grieve and heal, and respecting that with each other. So when we came back together, we could build a friendship. And really, I think a lot of what people struggle with is like, you have to really have a strong sense of self-worth. Going through a breakup requires you to kind of really reconsolidate your sense of self back into yourself.
Well, it's really interesting too, because I agree with you that it is a very much like of a grieving process. But it's also a grieving and torturous process in the sense of, well, this person is still here. Like they are technically still on this earth where, you're experiencing almost some different grieving moments when you actually lose someone close to you, but you could technically be with that person.
Well, that's why I often say, I think a breakup in some ways feels worse than death, because you're having the emotional experience of the death, and yet the person's still right there. And then you have to deal with things like them finding a new partner. Like there's all these new aggravating factors compounded on that loss, which is what I think can be very painful for people.
How did you feel during that period? Did you when people say like, oh, I won the breakup or everything, did you feel that you were striving forward quicker than your ex-husband, or were you really going through it?
I really put myself through it, and we both did. And I think, everybody's process looks a little different. And I think for me, there was an enormous amount of grief that had to come out. And so the way that I grieve, for instance, is just to take time. I didn't date. I created a window of just being celibate, of being sober, and just allowing myself to really feel all the feelings. I call him my was-band, my was-husband. My was-band had his version. He went to Hawaii and created like a beautiful healing space for himself. And I think it's funny how you say like people do get weirdly competitive about the breakups. Mm-hmm. This is part of the DNA I want to put into both building a relationship and navigating endings, which is it's collaborative. And it's not you versus the other person. It's not you trying to win commitment. It's not you ending commitment. Like, it's really this idea of like, you are, as two humans, co-creating and exploring and discovering, like, oh, is this a good union? Does this make sense for both of us? And if it does or it doesn't, isn't about whether one person is or isn't good enough. It's really just about the fact that we're looking for a great fit for complex humans with complex backgrounds, right?
Yeah. Do you think that you were still in a little bit of a Disney-fied moment and idealistic in your marriage? Okay.
What had me into that marriage was I was very much living in that paradigm still. Mm-hmm. And one of the beautiful things about that marriage, I think anyone who's had a very committed relationship learns this. You learn in a committed relationship that what makes a relationship work is making the relationship work, right? So there's a period where, that container of commitment was so helpful for me, because I learned that rather than my brain being like, oh, this isn't working, I'll find somebody else, which by the way is the culture that dating apps encourage. Yeah. Everyone's replaceable. There's an abundance. Swipe, swipe, swipe. If you find one small piece of friction, kill next, kill next. That culture of making everyone seem replaceable, and that the game of love is to swipe, swipe, swipe until you find the perfect person, is super destructive to and undermining in terms of building a relationship, versus getting very clear on like, what are the core things that you need to match up and align, and then accepting that after you have those kind of the good raw materials, the rest of it is work. And that's what I learned in my marriage. Like, we had a beautiful marriage. It didn't work out in the end because I actually realized I wanted to have kids, and we didn't have a future alignment on that. But I really got to, like, the only question I asked myself in that marriage was, how do I make this work? Mm-hmm. Not like, do I want to be with him? Should I get out? I was like, no, how do I make this work? And that question led me to learning all kinds of communication skills, intimacy skills, having to heal my own trauma and all my nonsense, right? And so I think, this is the thing, you start with this Disney-fied version of love, and then hopefully as we mature, we really understand that there is the magic, of course, and then there's really the accountability in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So at what point are you going through these apps and you're like, this sucks? Like, again, anyone who's ever done it, you're like, this absolutely sucks. Unless you meet someone and you're like, whatever, it was worth it, all the terrible dates. At what point are you like, okay, not only does this suck and needs to change, but I can be the change?
I actually had an experience. I had some very bad experiences. And it was interesting because we started kind of sniffing around to build Vette. Like, we'd started thinking about it, dreaming it up. But when we really pulled the trigger, I went on a date through the League, which, by the way, I think the League is like the lesser of evils. They do some vetting, they really try to make a more intentional culture. I went on a date with this person, and like, they ended up having a personality disorder, and they lost it on the first date. And I ended up in a very scary situation with somebody. And when I laid a complaint with the League, they just didn't do anything. They gave me a message saying like, hey, we'll look into it, but you won't know the outcome. And feeling that degree of like physical unsafety, it actually woke me up, and I realized like, wow, like, we're meeting strangers from the internet. Yeah. We're meeting strangers from the internet and letting them into the most vulnerable, intimate parts of ourselves. And a lot of women have this experience where they meet somebody, and whether it's verbal abuse, 30% of users report verbal abuse, 10% report threats of violence, right? Think about that. And then, or whether it's just like ghosting, like going on a date, thinking you've got this amazing connection, and then they just disappear. This is like this most intimate experience, and I experienced all of those things. And what I noticed in myself was that I started to feel afraid of dating. Mm-hmm. I started to feel afraid. Like, there were parts of me which didn't feel safe anymore.
Like, it's not worth it.
No. And so then this excitement, what should be the most exciting part of our lives if you're single, actually gets mingled with fear and terror. And men have their own version too. I've heard a lot of stories from men who, obviously there's a lot of disappointment, ghosting. A lot of men don't even get matched because the algorithms work so poorly for men who don't look like a model. Like 80% of women on Tinder swipe on the top 20% of men. There's a massive mismatch in terms of what we're judging on.
3 pictures, really. At the end of the day,
literally, think about how absurd that is. Yeah. So for instance, like, Vette is 100% video. One of the reasons I made that decision was because when you ask someone to assess attraction based on a heavily filtered image, right? The only data you're giving them is like basic symmetry. And so what happens is we just revert to our most base instincts around what is attractive. Whereas on video, you can hear their voice, you see how they move, you see how they hold themselves. There's something which giving people more data actually allows them to feel more attracted to people that they would swipe past. And I always ask those people, so if you're listening, think about this. Think about everybody you've dated and really ask yourself, if you'd seen them on a dating app, would you have swiped on them? And so many people, like I look at my last few boyfriends and probably not. What drew me to them is I met them, in person, or I met them on video, like I met them through like video calls, was who they were and how they held themselves. And, if I'd just seen a picture, I probably would have passed. So I think about, oh gosh, my heart goes, all these missed connections, right? Like imagine how many people are just like swiping past their soulmates. I'm like, ah. And so for me, exactly, between the terror, like really seeing the danger of these dating apps, the disappointment, and then going, gosh, like we just spent 2 years retraining the world to use video. Like, what are the possibilities? Could we build something that does that? And for me, like I have a background in building virtual communities and building educational products and building high-end communities. And so for me, it was like so much of the intelligence we'd use to do that, I was like, what if we applied that to dating, where we create a system where, how you used to meet people, friends of friends, colleagues, right? You used to meet in socialized, pre-vetted communities, and you had a chance to feel each other out. So I want to combine that kind of psychology with the convenience of technology, right? So you're able to do that, but in a virtual setting with people that are all single and all vetted and all values aligned. So I really, like we said earlier, dating is a huge industry. People are so motivated and people are very dissatisfied. Right. And when I became one of those dissatisfied singles, I was like, it's worth trying. Like, let's just try anything new. And
so the idea of creating a product and creating a technology product was not out of the realm of your experience. Like you had some base of foundation of how to actually make this a reality.
Because so one of the festivals, there were some in-person live events I've also helped to build and host over the years. And so one of them is a experience called A-Fest, which every 6 months moves into a different country. It's 400 to 500 people who apply. It's a pre-vetted community, roughly half men, half women, not single, but just values aligned. They're entrepreneurs who are into personal growth. And then we have these shared experiences. They fly in, we learn together. How many people met and got married out of that, including my father and myself?
Really?
Because, and that's the joke. We're always like, wow, so many love relationships come out of these communities. And I was like, why? I'm like, well, you're attracting people who have similar values, right? It's a vetted community. So everyone you meet is someone who you have something important in common with. So you're already kind of grouped together in a way that you're not now sifting through 3,000 random people in your area. You're sitting with someone who cares about the same things, who's in like a similar, sort of whatever values you have, it's in that similar lane. And now you're having an experience where you're able to meet, mingle, socialize, and spend time. And so attraction naturally tends to blossom in those circumstances. And so seeing how that had played out completely unintentionally, when we were dreaming this up, I was like, well, what if we did it very intentionally? So what if we created that model where values aligned, like everyone who comes into our system is background checked, they have to go through a very similar process. It's more like applying for a high-end social club. It's not a dating site. So the kind of people who are going to go through that process are going to have similar values, care about similar things, and have the same degree of like intentionality as everybody else. And we also have agreements, like how Burning Man has the 10 principles. We have 6 Vette agreements about how to play, how to show up, participating, kindness, and everyone has to agree to that. So you're creating a pre-vetted community of values-aligned singles. And then the idea is once you're in there, you play. So we have, 6 virtual spaces. You can do workshops on intimacy, whether it's comedy nights. And the idea being that, you're mingling and you're socializing virtually, but every single person you meet is a vetted single. So kind of taking the best of the psychology and the technology and finding a way to make that work so that, yes, that people can actually have a little bit of the magic of like meeting spontaneously, but ultimately in a place where the hit rate is high.
Because everyone's always like, oh, we met at the produce department in Whole Foods. Like that's everyone's ideal goal. Like, yeah, I just have them somewhere. So
absolutely. As a single person, how many parties you end up hanging around hoping to meet somebody?
Yeah.
But then you meet someone amazing and they have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, right? And like, so it's like hanging out in Whole Foods, you might meet that amazing person, but the chances that they're available, that it starts to feel like a lot of work, a lot of random work.
Yeah, definitely. I always look terrible in the grocery store too. So it's like never.
But how do you go from creating this concept of dream, like online dating utopia, if you will, to actually putting down, do you go back to your lawyer side of like, hey, let's create a business model? Or is it one of those, let's find somebody who can actually develop the product? What were your first steps?
I think for us, because this company was really born out of a bold vision, we were not looking to build something easy. We were looking to build something radically different. Okay. And really, we are willing and still are willing to roll the dice on that, because it would have been really easy to build another app. Like we are a very comprehensive sort of connection site with a companion app. It's a very different beast, which required a lot more work. And so for us, like, because we were really willing to do that, of course, the first thing is getting your first round of investors and seeing if you can raise enough money to make that possible. And we did. And then it was exactly that, like really making sure we were able to build enough of a product to see. And we did. So we built the first kind of pass of the product and tested that. And then once we'd done that and seen like, does this work? How do people like it? We went back for the rest of the money for our seed round. Having a much better idea of like what we were building and why, and being able to show it. Because I think the hardest thing about building something that doesn't exist yet is trying to explain it to people.
Right.
It's trying to get people to understand something that isn't in their frame of reference.
Yeah.
And so having an iterative approach where you build some and you can show it, and you can build it, then you can show it, really helps to bring everybody on board.
I want to dive a little bit more into the whole investing side, because that can be a very foreign conversation to a lot of entrepreneurs, whether that be just taking the first steps, but also, the whole investment round can very much feel like a game for both the VCs or whoever is investing, but especially for the founders.
Yes.
You're really playing into, you're dating in a way.
It's dating. Absolutely dating. It's so absolutely
how
dating.
did you approach it? And had you ever done fundraising before?
Never.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
So then how did you know what to do?
So this is learning as you go is really, it's half of the journey of a startup, right?
Sure.
I think because, and this is where the dating psychology really helped me. Think about a date or an investor meeting or any meeting where two people are coming together to see if there's a fit. Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make on both dates and then also on a call with an investor is to assume that you're selling them something. On a date, it can feel like you're selling them yourself. Like you're trying to sell them like, I'm cool, I'm this. I'm like, people get into that mode of, like really trying to pitch themselves to the other person. And I think that happens a lot in companies too, because especially when people say, well, it's literally a pitch, right? You're literally there, you're literally pitching. Versus the different model, which is, after a few calls, I started to understand, like, there's actually, I think, a healthier model, which I think A, feels better if you're a startup and you're going around doing these conversations, but then B, is good from a psychological perspective too, for the relationship, which is you are actually looking for a fit on both sides. You are also screening them. You're saying, hey, listen.
Feel like that if you're the entrepreneur, because
you have abundance. It does. Because think about it. There are so many investors in the world, between angels, like there really are. And I think this is where the healthy delusion has to kick in. You have to believe and hold the vision for your company and really think that what you're going to create is valuable and really believe that the right person will see that. And so if you find yourself sitting in front of somebody who's just an absolute no to it, and listen, I'll always take feedback. I'm always like curious why. I'm always willing to take feedback. But a lot of the time it's just a values alignment. And that way, same with a date, like you could sit opposite someone who's really awesome. You're like, wow, this is a great person. I don't think they're my person, but they're a great person. You can have the same feeling with an investor where, they might even like, we had lots of this, people like, we really love what you're doing, but I don't think it's quite a fit for us and what we invest in. And you're great. Thank you. No worries. Right. And I called it show and tell. Like whenever I go and do share with investor, I'm not pitching, I'm doing show and tell. I'm like, here's what we're building. Here's the vision. Do you want to come play? Would you like to be part of this journey? Would you like to bet on love? Would you like to help build something that could help the world, right? And so I think really, again, like you need to have a very strong vision of what you're creating and be able to essentially invite the investor into that journey versus being like, hi, would you please help me? You know, that kind of energy of like trying to sell yourself.
So similar to dating and the fact of like, if you're not on a dating app or you're not actively pursuing love and you're not going to just be walking down the street and be like, hey, I'm single, like you're cute, you want to go? I mean, actually, ideally, that'd be great. But if you didn't have, like you said, you didn't have connections, you'd never done the whole fundraising experience. How did you kick open that door to meet the individuals to even have the conversation?
Yeah, I think this is where leveraging relationships that you do have helps, and whatever you have, it's great. And I found that once we were able to open one door, more doors were able to open. And I remember there was an entrepreneur who was mapping this out recently where they were able to go back and they really did, like they were knocking on doors, they're reaching on LinkedIn, and you had to do a lot of that. Like there's a lot of just active reaching out and just inviting and really starting with like a low stakes invitation. And for 100, who knows how many will, sorry?
What's a low stakes invitation in your mind?
Yeah, like rather than being like, hey, do you want to jump on for like a half an hour pitch? It's a high stakes invitation. That's a lot of time is, saying like, hey, listen, like we're building this. Would you be open to a quick 5-minute call? And then really trusting and this is where like having a really great founder CEO who believes in the vision helps. All the investors I talk to say they invest in people. They know that obviously there's 1,000 different business models out there that look great, that work. And so they're really asking like, do I trust this person? Like, do I really believe that this person has the vision, has the capabilities? And so, and same with dating, right? If you do not have radical self-love, a great life that you love, if you are insecure and you're needing someone to complete you, that's not very attractive. So if you as a founder haven't got super clear on your vision and super clear on the value you're giving and are really excited about it, if you're still insecure about it, that probably isn't very compelling. But I think it's starting with like a low stakes invitation to either just share something, show something, a very quick call, and then trusting that, like one of those conversations could lead into a connection. And that connection, like this woman mapped out that there were literally 3 connections that led to everything in her business.
Yeah, right. But so we're all very familiar with the fact of like energy attraction. And I think we can all agree that, investing in people really comes down to confidence and the energy that you put out. And, again, really, like you said, knowing your product. But what about for founders that have a great concept, have a great outlook and business model, but they're not there yet on the confident side? How do you find that?
I'm a really big fan of never reinventing the wheel. In anything in my life, I get help. There are people who have dedicated their lives to figuring out how to, develop confidence or how to date well. I have coaches, I have teachers, I have therapists, I have mentors. I ask for help. I get help. I get help from experienced people. So when I'm struggling with something, I don't sit and spin round and round and round. I go, wow, identify the problem. Like let's say I'm hitting a limiting belief around money, right? Which you have to clean all that up when you're founding and you're trying to create a big company. I hit a limiting belief and I go, gosh, who is somebody, either someone, whether it's a book, whether it's a coach, who is somebody who specializes in this? And how can I go and learn from them? And so for me, that's what I was talking about, the active willingness to clean up and account for yourself. You have to take responsibility for what is not working inside of your own mind, your own fears, your own limiting beliefs, and really be proactive about figuring that out. And the best way to do that is just get help.
So as a leader, how do you lead as a company while also still being humble enough to learn and make mistakes as a founder?
I feel like most of what we do right now is just make mistakes. I think I don't know if that will ever change. I think it's almost impossible not to be humble because this experience of being a startup and building a company is trying something, smashing up against objective reality and seeing what happens, and being super willing to go, that's not working, and change. And so many times I've had to go, I had an idea, we tried it failed. It's not working.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are some of the mistakes you've made so far?
Yeah, oh my goodness. We, and the way I like to put it is like, we don't call them mistakes. We call them like, you have a first best guess. Everybody does. You go, I have a best guess. We had a best guess around what kind of marketing would land. And we spent good money on it. We made some really compelling content and this, and it was a total waste of money. Total waste of money. We spent probably like 40, 50K on these incredible commercials and like stuff that we thought were going to rock it. Total waste of money. And what worked was the quickest, stupidest, cheapest organic TikToks, right? So like literally just me being like on the phone, and versus a whole beautifully produced, thoughtfully created comedy skits filmed with actors, right? So we made a best guess. It didn't work. Pivot. When it comes to the product, we originally had this idea, like a certain kind of order to our onboarding. And really in my head, it made sense. But then when we put people through it, it was comically bad. We're like, oh, this is really hard for people. And so again, not forcing it, but being like, okay, how can we rearrange the order to make that onboarding flow feel really fun for people? And so I think, one of the things I've noticed is that we talk about healthy delusion. I have healthy delusion for the overall vision, but I'm not married to exactly how that has to look. I think that's super important, is not getting so attached to exactly the specifics of how it's going to manifest versus being really clear about like the overall, like for me, a platform that creates healthy love, right? Got it. Now, whether I have the background check at the beginning or the end, let's see what works, right? So I think that's the balance. And every time we make a quote unquote mistake, I really just see it as like, again, we had our first best guess, take the feedback, next best guess, take the feedback, next best guess. And it kind of gamifies it. Then it's like fun, it's not a mistake. It's a predictable process.
Alongside of that, do you set tangible goals for the company, or are you okay with flowing how it goes, at least in the first couple of years?
That's something I'm sort of like battling with now, because if you think about goals, especially when you're starting, like we're a young company, you're telling yourself a fictitious story. You're making goals based on a bunch of stories you have in your head. And sometimes when you start actually going and doing, like putting your product out there, you might learn things you didn't know before. And so you have to adapt and change your goals. Mm-hmm. So we kind of build goals, but again, as we learn more, we adapt them. And I think at this moment in our company, we're very much, I'd say, in a dialogue with reality. We like try, see. But ultimately, like every company, like you have to have, at some point, there has to be something which translates into money, into viability. And so that's also very real. So like we do have, but again, almost like meta goals. So I'm talking about like building towards a type of membership, thriving membership community. But exactly how we get there, we play with all the time.
So who is the ideal individual to join Vette?
Yes. Oh, my favorite people. I built this for my people, and my people are, this is what's really fun about it too. There's no specific filter, like most of the exclusive apps are. Like Raya filters for followers. How famous are you? Right. The League filters for like, did you go to a fancy school? Are you in finance? Right. Like Luxy Singles filters for wealth. Like these are these very superficial filters. We filter for self-awareness and integrity, for intentionality. And so our type of people come from all walks of life. What we're seeing as a pattern is they tend to be either like professionals or entrepreneurs or people who are usually 30s, 40s, 50s, people who have clearly know who they are really intentional about what they want to create, care about the quality of their relationships, have a good sort of basis of self-worth. They're usually into health and wellness. And they're the kind of people who actually have lots of options. Their issue isn't they don't have options. It's that they're exhausted. They're sick of swiping. They're sick of having to spend so much time to find one quality candidate. And they really care about having a healthy relationship. Yeah. And so those are the kind of people who are willing to put in the extra work it takes to be part of, an intentional dating community, because they know that for them, that payoff is so much more valuable, so much more rewarding than essentially having to sift through all of humanity to try and find, like one reasonable match.
As a company, how do you judge and make that, accept that individual based off a blind application, and judging them again, kind of based off of a few filtered pictures and a biography or whatever people want to say about themselves?
Doing it. We have what we call like the soft vetting and the hard vetting. So the hard vetting is, of course, a background check. So we are the only company that requires an actual background check, like through a certified background checking system we're integrated with. So you give us your social security number and we do a full identity verification. That is very important for the safety of everyone in the club. And it honestly, just anyone who plans to run a scam will not do that. There's that degree of verification keeps the people out that we don't want in. So there's the hard vetting, but then the soft vetting is that we don't have pictures, right? Everything is video.
Okay.
And how it works is I very much believe that part of what makes a person interesting is not just the good stuff. Like most of the dating is like highlight reels, right? Like, oh, my life is amazing. And if you don't have super filtered images and like a picture in Bali, then who are you, right? What we do is everybody has the exact same parameters of the videos they have to make. You make 5 very short videos. One is a vibe video, which is our version of a profile picture, which is really fun, which is that we ask everyone to pick 3 words that have something to do with them. And it could be anything, like it could be a location, it could be a hobby, it could be a food. And we get people to kind of choose the ones that are more interesting. And they just look straight to camera and they just say those 3 words. That is the first interaction you'll ever have with a member. So you won't even see a picture, you'll open it up and actually hear their voice and see them speaking in a 3 to 5 second video. It's super fun and that kind of changes the whole dynamic. So there's that. And then each person, there's 4 areas of life: family, love, career, lifestyle. And everyone has to answer the questions. What do you love about this area of your life? What sucks about this area of your life? And what do you want? And it's in like a 60 to 90 second video. And it's so captivating to watch people tell the truth about who they are, what they love, what's not working. And so by doing that, when we hand vet every single profile, as well as doing the hard vetting, we're seeing them on camera. You can tell a lot about a person by how they share. And the truth is, the type of people who show up and are willing to engage in that way, they're usually the kind of people that are absolutely a fit. So we're checking for like, there's like a vibe fit, and there's also, of course, like the actual identity verification.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you kind of the same question. So what have you loved about this founder journey?
I have loved so many things, but I think the key thing for me has been a reappreciation of like what it takes to change society. I think for a long time, I was in very linear traditional models, law, teaching. Something that being a founder has taught me is that, it's through the persistent, committed, enthusiastic effort of people building new things, pushing what they believe that society changes. It's an extraordinary amount of effort, but I've loved actually learning that and having the chance to participate that sort of for the first time, I think, in my life. That's been amazing.
Interesting. So what sucked? What has sucked in this founder?
I mean, honestly, it is all the uncertainty. It's terrifying. There's so much uncertainty. And even if you hold the vision, like there are moments where, I understand that even if I do my very, very best, it doesn't mean it's going to work. The vast majority of companies don't work. You're really rolling the dice on something you believe, and there's no guarantees. It's not like taking a good job where if you just do your job well, you'll progress. This is a real gamble. And especially, bringing in investors, having my team, there are moments where I feel really afraid that I'm going to disappoint everybody, that I'm going to let everybody down, and that, the risk of failure is always real. And the fear of what that could mean, or, the fear of, did I do enough? That crippling uncertainty is like, that is very, very painful.
Super personal, the whole journey. Absolutely.
Super painful.
So it's fully launching this month, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So how we're working is, because again, like we're in a situation where the most important part of a community of singles is to have enough people to make it fun.
Sure.
And so that's what we're offering. We have like a pre-loading period for founding members where we're offering like a discounted price, and people can come in, they can apply, have their profiles accepted. We're doing that for like a period of a couple months. And then we'll actually open the club doors at a certain time and populate with all our founding members. So we're just about to open applications for founding membership, which is really exciting,
That's exciting. Awesome. Well, Mia, thank you so much for telling us your story and coming on the come up. And this has been a great pleasure to meet you.
No, thank you so much for your interesting reflections and questions. It was such a pleasure.
Definitely. Well, enjoy the rest of is it a vacation or just?
Working vacation. There's part of being a founder, no real vacation.
I love it. Yeah, that's true. That is true. But it's going to pay off. Do what you love.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Definitely.
Thanks. This is a great conversation.
Yeah.